Imagine dying just 11 miles from survival, or being remembered as the first to sail around the world, even though you never finished the journey, or disappearing on the world's tallest mountain, only to be found 75 years later, frozen in time. These are the real endings of history's greatest explorers, and trust me, their deaths are more unbelievable than their discoveries.
Welcome to The Explainer. You know the names of history's greatest explorers, but what about how they died? Well, it turns out the end of their story is often way more revealing and sometimes deeply ironic than the discoveries that made them famous. So let's just dive right in. We're going to start at the very end, with these words from a man literally freezing to death in a tent. What's incredible is that his last thoughts weren't about his own fate, but about the families of the men who were dying right there with him.
See, this isn't just a grim list of how famous people died. It's about how their final moments, whether it was a stupid mistake, a tragic twist of fate, or an unbelievable act of sacrifice, completely changed how we remember them.
All right, first up, we've got two giants of the sea. And you might think they probably died in a huge storm or from scurvy, right? Nope. Their stories end because of fatal misunderstandings thousands of miles from home. So take Captain James Cook. He had this go-to move. If someone stole from his ship, he just grabbed the local chief and hold him hostage until they got his stuff back. It had worked before, but in Hawaii, it backfired badly. The whole thing just exploded, and moments later, he was dead in the surf. And this is where it gets really fascinating. His crew sees the Hawaiians taking his body, and they think the worst, cannibalism. But they had it completely wrong. The Hawaiians actually thought Cook was a god, so they were giving him their most sacred funeral rite. They weren't desecrating him, they were honoring him. His final resting place? Well, his sacred bones were scattered across the very islands where he died. Okay, now let's jump over to Ferdinand Magellan. Picture this. He decides to get involved in a local tribal fight in the Philippines. He wades ashore with just 60 guys in armor, probably thinking, we've got superior tech, this'll be easy. Except, waiting for them on that beach, over 1,500 warriors. Yeah, a fatal miscalculation is putting it mildly. The odds were just impossible.
And this is what's so wild about Magellan's whole legacy. First off, he dies in this random local squabble that had zero to do with his actual mission. Second, his body was never even found. But the biggest irony of all, the guy famous for being the first to circle the globe never actually made it. He died halfway. In fact, his slave, Enrique, might have been the real first person to do it. Just think about that.
So, from the heat of the tropics, we're heading to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, to places so harsh the land itself is what kills you.
All right, let's talk about Sir John Franklin. His mission to find the Northwest Passage was supposed to be foolproof. I mean, they were one of the best equipped expeditions ever. They even had a secret weapon, this brand new technology, 3 years' worth of tinned food. And here's the kicker. The one thing that was supposed to save them is exactly what killed them. The cans were sealed with lead, and that lead poisoned their food, slowly driving the entire crew mad. Can you imagine? Local Inuit people later said they saw the last survivors just wandering the ice, dragging useless things like silverware. The mission wasn't just a failure. It turned into a horror story of insanity and cannibalism, all thanks to their secret weapon. Okay, the story of Robert Falcon Scott is just heartbreaking. And this chart really says it all. After being beaten to the South Pole, his team had to trek 1,600 miles back. 1,600 miles. They almost made it, but they died, frozen in their tent, just 11 miles from a huge stash of food and fuel. 11 miles. And in the middle of that disaster, you get this moment of incredible sacrifice. One of his men, Lawrence Oates, was so badly frostbitten he knew he was holding everyone back. So he just says, I am just going outside and maybe some time, and walks out into a blizzard to his death. He was trying to save them. It didn't work. Their bodies were never brought back. The tent where they died is their final resting place, now buried under decades of snow and ice.
And what about George Mallory? He disappears on Mount Everest, and then 75 years later, his body is found perfectly preserved. It's like a crime scene from the past. And here's the big clue. He promised he'd leave a photo of his wife on the summit if he made it. That photo wasn't on his body. So, did he make it? We don't know. His partner and their camera are still missing. The answer to one of climbing's greatest mysteries is still up there, frozen in time, just like Mallory.
You know, sometimes the biggest challenge isn't the jungle or the ice. It's what's going on inside your own head. Take Meriwether Lewis, of Lewis and Clark fame. He comes back from his expedition as an absolute national hero. Everybody loves him. But just 3 years later, he's drowning in debt, he's sick, and he's battling a crippling depression, a total downward spiral.
His end was just horrific. It wasn't quick. At a tiny, remote inn, he shot himself twice and survived, then used a razor. It took hours. And his last words, "I am no coward, but I am so strong. It is so hard to die." They just tell you everything, don't they? This man who conquered the American wilderness couldn't conquer his own mind. That tragic end completely changes how we look at his story.
Now, Christopher Columbus. You'd expect him to die surrounded by luxury, right? The admiral of the ocean sea. Nope. He chose to die wearing the simple robes of a monk. It was basically his final act of protest, a symbolic middle finger to the Spanish king and queen who he felt had betrayed him and stolen his glory. He died in terrible pain from an illness that literally made his eyes bleed, and he went to his grave still insisting he had found a back route to Asia. He was fundamentally wrong about his greatest discovery. And weirdly, that confusion followed him after death. His bones were shipped around the world 4 times, and today, 2 different cities in 2 different countries claim to have his real remains. Nobody's even sure where he is. Okay, our last story is something else. It's about an explorer whose final resting place tells a story so powerful, it might just eclipse everything he discovered during his life. So, the famous explorer David Livingstone is found dead in Zambia, kneeling in prayer beside his bed. And his 2 attendants, Chuma and Susi, have to decide what to do. They make this incredible, poetic choice. They decide his heart belonged in Africa, the continent he loved. But his body, that needed to go home to England. And what they did next is just mind-blowing. They surgically removed his heart and buried it right there, under a mavundo tree. Then they spent 2 weeks drying and salting his body to preserve it. And then they carried him. For 9 months, they carried his body over 1,000 miles to the coast, all just to fulfill his legacy, a heart in Africa, a body in Westminster Abbey. So when you look at them all together, it's pretty clear their deaths weren't just footnotes. They were dramatic final chapters. And their final resting places, whether lost forever, buried under a mile of ice, or split between 2 continents, are a huge part of what makes their stories so compelling. It really makes you think, doesn't it? When you hear about a perfectly preserved body on Everest, or a heart buried under a tree in Africa, what sticks with you more? The amazing discovery they made, or the incredible human price they paid to make it?
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. And check out the next video on your screen, you'll definitely enjoy that one.